Alrighty. This should be the last one, I think. If you're just tuning in, we have several previous videos on Manifest Destiny, and we're going to talk about some of the lingering problems that remain as a result of the Mexican-American War, the formation of some new political parties. It's going to lead us into the Civil War era, and some other lingering problems that we should get into. So, nonetheless, the Free Soil Party is arguably the most significant minority party that originates. Although one could totally debate that. So, in any case, the Free Soil Party, its name, in a lot of ways, is self-explanatory. The concept of free soil was future territory that was to be closed to slavery, right? Hence the term soil, right? Free soil meaning no slavery on this new soil, right? Some of these people, there were a number of different reasons why people wanted to shift and form a new party. Some former Democrats sort of felt like they had no place because as we move forward in time, the Democratic Party was almost always, its stronghold at least was almost always in either the South or the West. And so Northern Democrats, who bought into quite a bit of the party but not the slavery issue, ended up feeling like they had to leave the party. So some of them joined the Free Soilers. You're also going to see other parties emerge: the much smaller Liberty Party and also the Whig Party. Some of the members of these parties that feel like there was not enough of an anti-slavery agenda associated with these parties end up moving and joining the Free Soil Party. Right, as I discussed in the previous video, some former Whig leaders like General Winfield Scott and William Henry Harrison, even, they're not necessarily anti-slavery, right? So the Whig Party itself was not really progressive. You need a new party to develop for that, and eventually we're going to see the Republican Party fulfill that role. In any case, the Free Soilers, basically their bottom line was that they didn't want slavery to expand, right? And then the Liberty Party, which emerges, actually has arguably an even more rigid anti-slavery definition. The Free Soil Party, in some ways, could be seen as just an anti-expansion of slavery, right? And they were okay with leaving slavery intact in places that already had it. So, for example, someone who was a free soiler might say, well, we don't want any slavery in Kansas because that hasn't been settled yet, but it's okay to leave slavery in South Carolina because they rely upon it, right? The Liberty Party, when it starts to emerge, also wants slavery to be abolished in places where it already existed, right? So this was seen as more socially progressive. But nonetheless, there were some people who left the Liberty Party to join the Free Soil Party because that was seen as more politically practical. In 1848, right, so we're going to see the rise of Zachary Taylor, one of the only Whigs, with the exception of William Henry Harrison, to actually win presidential election, right? Zachary Taylor was the vice president of James Polk, right? So sort of or rather, oh, sorry, I totally misspoke there. That was a silly thing for me to say. No, he is not the vice president of James Polk. Scratch that from the record. Polk was a Democrat. In any case, Zachary Taylor ran on the premise of being a war hero. There we go. Back to the real history. Back to the facts. Zachary Taylor ended up using his war record to win and run and successfully win the presidential election in 1848. But as you can see here, it was relatively close, especially in terms of the popular vote, right? You do see Martin Van Buren, or Martin Van Buren as he is known, try to run unsuccessfully as a free soiler, right? Lewis Cass, you see that the Democratic Party is still strong in many parts of the South and even parts of the West, but not strong enough. Right. We talked about the Mexican Cession. Just another image of it here. Notice the areas that Texas ends up actually ceding eventually to the future unsettled territories. Right. The Republic of Texas was actually originally larger than the modern state is. Most notably, right after the Mexican Cession, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill, California, right, which is not too far away from Sacramento. And the gold rush subsequently emerges. I could talk about the gold rush for a long period of time, but without getting into too much detail, the gold rush was a massive migration. Thousands of Americans, thousands of pioneers, along with their slaves, um, along with other immigrants and even East Asian migrants from places like China migrated in order to take place in the labor industry to construct the transcontinental railroad. So you have migration coming from east, coming from west, coming from literally, not literally all over the world, but from a number of different places globally to populate this new region, to take advantage of the economic opportunities and so on. The people who migrated, especially the pioneers who migrated from east to west, got the nickname 49ers, like the San Francisco football team, right? They were named 49ers because the year 1849 was the year where we see the largest migration to the West Coast, right? The ultimate destination many times was San Francisco itself, although you saw many people stopping off in some of these major gold mining areas, right? You see the advent of these instant instant metropolises. San Francisco develops virtually overnight, and by the turn of the 20th century, San Francisco is a bustling metropolis, although we'll see what happens with an earthquake that strikes it in 1906. I always spoil things, sorry. This is a very early photograph of people sifting and digging for gold in California. This is taken close to Sacramento. And we also, again, going back to art a little bit, we have some of these nostalgic and sort of optimistic portrayals through art of the San Francisco Bay Area. Right, by 1860, so only 10 years after California is added to the Union, the population of San Francisco alone was 300,000, right? And you see the population of the Oregon and California coastline expand dramatically just in the 10 years after the acquisition of California, right? Again, you see the degree of territorial growth as displayed in this map here. And eventually we'll see the acquisition of some of these subsequent states, right? The Gadsden Purchase, by the way, I talked about it briefly but didn't really explain what it was. The Gadsden Purchase was not part of the original Mexican Cession in 1848. You can see it was purchased in 1853, and largely the reason behind this was um, by the early 1850s, there were plans in motion to complete a transcontinental railroad, ultimately with some sort of western terminus along the Pacific coast, right? Southerners, people who wanted slavery to expand west, largely wanted the transcontinental railroad to pass through the south. They wanted one of the eastern terminuses to be St. Louis, right? And so in order to go through the south, this part of the Rocky Mountains is incredibly steep. So to make it more easily done, right? The U.S. purchased this area of land along the Arizona-Mexico border that is flatter, so that railroad tracks can pass more easily through it, right? Today, I believe Interstate 15 still passes through the Gadsden Purchase territory because of the elevation. It's an easier area to drive through. But nonetheless, ultimately, the Northerners get their way, and the Transcontinental Railroad will have a eastern terminus in Chicago instead, and it will pass through this northern pass, not too far from the Donner Pass, right, and end up stopping in San Francisco instead. Right, yet another piece of American art. This is actually a German artist, Emmanuel Leutze, in 1860. Again, demonstrating sort of the nostalgia, the sense of progress that was associated with westward expansion. Nonetheless, you can sort of tell that there is this sort of sentiment that's associated with this time period. This is also when we start to embrace some of the wild, wild west stereotypes, you know, the myth of the cowboy, for example, the expansion of American pastoralism, the expansion of the cattle and beef industries, and so on. Expansionism in the United States is not limited just to North America, however. You see an increased interest in Latin American regions, most notably Central America, right? You're going to see an effort to also annex places like Cuba, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and there were attempted American raids, largely under Polk and Pierce's presidency, into these areas, but none of them resulted in too much success on the American front, although we'll see at the turn of the 20th century that the U.S. will have more of a significant influence over Cuba, and we'll get there when the time comes. All right, that does it for Manifest Destiny. This does not by any means stop with this slide, though, right? Manifest Destiny really continues significantly into the outbreak of the Civil War, so I don't really want to end this presentation with a distinctive period at the end of the sentence, right? Please stay tuned for the videos talking about the immediate causes of the Civil War, so the crisis of the 1850s. We're also going to talk a little bit more about the abolition movement and the women's rights movements in a couple of videos in between. So thanks as always for watching, and stay tuned, and so long.